Yes, Bastogne really was that close. For a stretch, in late December 1944, one more bad supply day might have turned a famous holdout into a collapse. That is the part legend smooths over. We remember Bastogne as defiance, the siege, the famous reply, the symbol. But symbols come later. In the moment, men inside Bastogne were cold, surrounded, short on ammunition, short on medical supplies, and waiting for either the weather or a relief force to change the math before the pressure did. So this is not the story of a secure position that heroically held with room to spare. It is the story of a road junction that survived on timing. Start with what everyone thinks they know. The German Ardennes offensive would fail, and Bastogne would stay in American hands. Rewind a few days, and that result looks far less settled. Bastogne mattered because it was a road hub. In the Ardennes, that was everything. Dense forest, winter conditions, limited mobility. Big formations could not just spread out and move cross-country with ease. They needed roads to advance, supply, and coordinate. If German forces cleared Bastogne quickly, movement across the southern part of the offensive got easier. If Bastogne kept resisting, it became a hard obstruction inside an operation built on speed. And speed was the whole idea. The offensive opened under bad weather. That helped conceal German movement and limited Allied air power. It gave the attack surprise and early momentum. But surprise only mattered if momentum kept building. Delay was poison. A traffic jam, a defended crossroads, a bridge problem, a unit forced to stop and fight where it expected to pass through. Each one took a bite out of the plan. Bastogne became dangerous for both sides. The Americans needed it to slow the advance. The Germans needed it to stop slowing them. The defense there was improvised, not comfortable. Units arrived from different commands under intense pressure. Positions had to be organized fast. Artillery became essential. For a short time, roads into town were still usable. Then the ring tightened. By the time Bastogne was fully encircled, it was less a fortress than a hurriedly reinforced road center under snow. Now add the weather again. The same low cloud that helped launch the offensive also trapped the defenders in a suspended crisis. If aircraft could not get through, resupply depended on whatever had already made it in. If the roads out were cut, what was inside the perimeter had to last. And what mattered most was ammunition. Food was a problem. Medical shortages were severe. Exposure was constant. But for a surrounded force facing artillery and armored attacks, ammunition set the real clock. German pressure mounted in the days before Christmas. Shelling hit the town. Casualties rose. Aid stations were strained. The defense held, but it held while asking ugly practical questions. How many rounds were left? Which sectors were weakest? Whether the next attack was only a probe or the start of something bigger. This is the close call. Bastogne did not have to fall in one dramatic breakthrough to be lost. It could have been worn down. One sector could have cracked under concentrated pressure. Artillery could have gone quiet at the wrong moment. A relief column could have been delayed another day. The weather could have stayed closed a little longer. None of that is fantasy. It was built into the situation. That is why the most fragile phase matters. Before relief arrived, and before air supply could meaningfully ease the pressure, Bastogne was living on temporary fixes. Ammunition had to be managed carefully. The number of wounded kept growing. Cold and exhaustion were not background details. They directly affected combat performance. And this is the part worth pausing on. There was no single magical save. What kept Bastogne alive was a narrow sequence of things not going wrong all at once. The defenders needed the weather to improve enough for aircraft to get through. They needed German attacks to fail to achieve a decisive rupture before that happened. And they needed the relief effort pushing toward the town to keep moving despite resistance, bad roads, and its own delays. Bastogne survived because those clocks aligned just enough. That is the point hindsight hides. This was not a confident garrison waiting to be rescued. It was a race between depletion and interruption. If depletion won first, the story ends differently. When the skies finally improved, the balance began to change. Allied aircraft could reach the area more effectively. Supplies could be dropped. It is worth being careful here. Airdrops were not a perfect cure. Weather still mattered. Accuracy mattered. Enemy fire mattered. But even imperfect resupply could mean the difference between a defense near exhaustion and one that could keep firing. At nearly the same time, the attackers were hitting their own limits. The German offensive was never an endless surge. Fuel shortages were serious. Traffic congestion was severe across the wider operation. Bastogne still mattered, but reducing it quickly became harder as the broader offensive lost tempo. That did not make the defenders safe. It meant the attackers were also running short on easy options. Then came the next shift. Patton's Third Army had turned north in one of the campaign's key operational moves. The approach to Bastogne was difficult and contested. It was not a clean drive through open ground. But every mile mattered, because relief did not need to destroy the encirclement in one blow. It only had to open contact and change the equation inside the town. That is what happened. The ring was pierced. Bastogne was not instantly free of danger, but the siege had failed in its essential purpose. The defenders had lasted through the window that mattered most. So what would a collapse have changed? Probably not the entire war. It is important not to overstate that. But it could have changed the opening phase of the Battle of the Bulge in meaningful ways. A fall in Bastogne likely would have eased German use of important roads in the southern sector and removed a major obstacle during the period when time mattered most. It could have complicated Allied reaction and bought the Germans more freedom of movement for at least some crucial days. Instead, Bastogne became the opposite: a blockage, a delay, a stubborn fact on the map that the offensive could not bypass without cost. And in an operation built on speed, delay was deadly. That is the real lesson. History often looks inevitable after the weather clears, after relief arrives, after the legend hardens. But inside those brutal days, Bastogne was not secure. It was surviving by inches.